by Musicuentos.com and Indwelling Language. This episode is developed and presented by me, Sarah Elizabeth Cottrell, teacher, research enthusiast, and the blogger behind Musicuentos.com. The topic of this episode is a 2015 article called Foreign Language Aptitude and Its Relationship with Grammar, a Critical Overview. The author is Peter Skehan, a professorial research fellow at St. Mary's University in England who specializes in research on aptitude and what it means for teachers in the classroom. This research article isn't one that presents a study. Rather, it's a study of studies, and that's part of what makes it so helpful. Instead of you or I having to dig up and read several studies on how aptitude affects learning, Skehan has done it for us. Skehan gives two goals for his article, which means we have two goals for this video. The first is to understand foreign language aptitude better, and the second is to explore how aptitude is relevant to language learning. But really, we need to start at the beginning, because that's a very good place to start. What is this thing we're calling aptitude anyway? Teachers know that you can expose 30 language learners to the same interaction under nearly the same circumstances and get about 30 different results. That's because of what happens inside the head, the mysterious black box. Trying to find out why we get different results from the same input, researchers have set about identifying a set of individual differences, the things that are different from one learner to the next and influence the outcome. One of those is aptitude. But what is aptitude? Traditionally, when we say language learners have high aptitude, we mean they have some set of abilities that seem particularly useful for the learning of second languages. What does this mean? It means your general intelligence doesn't predict how well you'll learn another language, and it means you mostly have it or you don't, and you can't exactly develop more of it. And it means that researchers are identifying specific components. But what components? What are these mysterious special abilities that help you in second language learning? Here are four. One is phonemic coding, related to identifying and processing different sounds. Then there's grammatical sensitivity, or how well you can get a feel for acceptably organizing the pieces of language. Then there's inductive language learning ability, or how well you can break down those structures and make rules out of them without being told. The last is associative memory, how well you associate a foreign word with its meaning and remember that. Hand in hand with identifying what those components are is the question of how to test whether a learner has them. Over the years, researchers have worked on different tests intended to measure aptitude, with the goal of predicting how fast and well a second language will be learned. In his overview, Skehan identifies strengths in the tests that are available, but also several problems. So, he first issues a call for a new test, one that's widely available, well validated with a wider range of learners, and includes a piece measuring the learner's ability to notice patterns in language. Now on to more content related to the second goal of Skehan's article, an overview of studies that investigate what aptitude means for learning grammar. Not the this is a noun, this is an adjective type of grammar, but does the sentence, I wear no Noah's book, make your brain have a hiccup, that type of grammar. First, Skehan looks at three types of studies exploring the relationship between aptitude and teaching. The three types regarding pedagogy start with what aptitude has to do with metalinguistic knowledge, then with forms of instruction, then feedback. First, Skehan looked at studies on aptitude and metalinguistic knowledge, which is the ability to talk about the bits and pieces of language, not just use them. The research indicates moderate to strong relationships here. Those learners who are more sensitive to grammar know how to talk about language better and fix errors, and less so, they also tend to perform better. Second, Skehan analyzed some micro-experimental studies that looked at how aptitude interacts with forms of instruction. That is, do students who have higher aptitude perform differently in situations of explicit learning, where the learning is conscious and explained? Does their high aptitude make a difference in implicit learning, where the learning is more unconscious, without analysis or grammatical explanation? A while back, De Keyser argued that aptitude is really only relevant in explicit learning, but that view is shifting. Some studies show it may be relevant for implicit or unaware learning as well, and that's a major focus of what Skehan is looking for here. Skehan offers a table of results from 7 studies. He shows the particular language form studied, as well as which aptitude test was used, and shows the relationship between implicit and explicit learning that the study found. For all of the studies, it seems like higher aptitude means more likely to benefit from any kind of instruction, either implicit or explicit, even over short periods. But here, one of the reviewers of the article pointed out what we've mentioned before in the black box. The distinction between implicit and explicit isn't clear-cut, especially when you're measuring something in learners who are in a classroom setting. Implicit by definition is unconscious, it's happening inside the head, and there's really no way to say for sure that the learner didn't engage in any explicit processes. Even so, there's one more especially interesting finding here, in a study important for being the longest. It indicated a strong tendency for the effect of aptitude on implicit learning over time. What does that mean? It means aptitude may even influence success in implicit learning, given more time. The third analysis is on a set of studies related to a major area of research in second language acquisition as it relates to teaching. Does feedback help, and how? That is, here in this article, if a teacher corrects the student's errors, does high aptitude make a difference in whether or not the feedback helps? Out of 4 studies, 3 strongly indicated that high aptitude learners do benefit from explicit feedback, or correction that's clearly labeled. If correction is not explicit, they don't benefit as much. On the other hand, learners with lower aptitude didn't seem to benefit from even very explicit feedback. This makes sense. Learners who are sensitive to how language gets put together may benefit more from being told outright about it, and how they're doing it wrong, and how to do it right. After the section on general research on aptitude and its connections to grammar, Skehan discusses one last set of studies. How does aptitude relate to what is known as the sensitive period? Here we need to understand 2 common terms. First, the sensitive period is a time somewhere between ages 3 and 16, during which a learner is particularly sensitive to learning language, or primed to do it well, so to speak. The second term to understand is the grammaticality judgment test, or GJT. On such a test, a person is given a sentence or set of sentences and asked how grammatical it is. Again, this isn't about labeling nouns and verbs. It's about looking at sentences like, the costume feared the woman, or the costume scared the woman, or the costume made the woman feared, and judging how correct they sound. These studies were started by De Keyser and later robustly replicated by researchers Skehan calls the Stockholm Group, and they showed that if you move to a place with a new language while you're in the sensitive period, you can pretty much always end up scoring well on a judgment test. Come later, and one learner will, another learner won't. It seems more and more likely that aptitude is the difference. If you come after the sensitive period, and you have higher aptitude, you're more likely to still be able to achieve near-native proficiency. De Keyser thought it was because learners with higher aptitude seem to be better at explicit learning, but several others disagree with him on this point. Even beyond what De Keyser found, the Stockholm Group studies indicated higher aptitude could prevent language attrition, or whether you'll become a poor speaker of your native language or lose it altogether. Their findings were even with young children, who we assume learn implicitly, so their studies may indicate a very interesting link between aptitude and implicit learning, even first language acquisition, though a later study of wide range of ages found the correlation in the older group, but not the younger. In summary, the evidence is not extensive, but these are the general impressions. First, aptitude helps with instruction, both implicit and explicit, though with implicit instruction, it may take longer for the effects to show up. Aptitude is especially helpful if the grammar feature appears a lot, or isn't strictly necessary for communication. Second, aptitude helps with feedback, if the feedback is explicit, and especially if the grammar feature does not appear a lot, and isn't strictly necessary for communication. As for a relationship with the sensitive period, if you have higher aptitude, you're more likely to achieve perceived native likeness, even if you start learning at a later age, but maybe even within the sensitive period, and you could even have developed your native language better and faster. Researchers tend to think this is because you're better at teasing out the analytical pieces of language. So then what? Skehan has some recommendations for researchers, and I have some recommendations for teachers. Skehan wants to see a couple of questions addressed in the research. First, is language a special ability? Researchers need to explore from the perspective of aptitude, if its relationship to language is specific to the language domain or applies across different domains. Second, how does aptitude play out in explicit versus implicit learning? We need an aptitude test that lets us see any difference between implicit and explicit learning, so we know how aptitude works with each. Easier said than done, but worth the effort. Here we have this handful of studies finally bringing aptitude into the realm of the process of acquisition and practical application. But there are problems with the research. Specifically, Skehan wants to see studies on aptitude over longer periods of time and with a wider, more representative student population. In the meantime, here's my takeaway. Many of the most successful language learners I know are also language teachers. I sometimes hear them face an argument that goes something like this. There's no use for explicit instruction. Only implicit experiences will build the language in learners' heads that is accessible for fluid communication. At that, they balk. It's not true, they say. It can't be true, they say, because they know that learning the grammatical rule helped them be more accurate. In my case, at this stage in my language journey, I frequently consciously think through why and how to execute a third-person past subjunctive verb in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of an unrehearsed conversation. Perhaps this summary of studies by Skehan and his encouragement for a new push in research and aptitude has an answer for us. Perhaps it's because most of us language teachers have high aptitude. For learners with high aptitude, it's entirely possible that if we explicitly tell them that the verb endings change, that there is a grammar paradigm, maybe it is forming language that's available for more or less spontaneous, accurate communication. Until someone is teasing out the difference over long periods of time, with a greater variety of learners, and contrasting implicit and explicit conditions, we can't say it doesn't, and given the research so far, we can say it looks pretty favorable for that case. On the other hand, we don't know how many of the learners in our classes at any given time have high aptitude, and we shouldn't be teaching only to those high flyers, the ones who are just like us. On the other hand, engaging implicit experiences infused with meaning are almost sure to benefit all our learners. So those should occupy most of our classroom. But if a student raises his hand and asks why all the verbs are ending in N, there's no harm in a brief explanation. And for a learner with high aptitude, it could actually help in the long run. The Musicuentos Black Box podcast is a collection of media resources intended to form an easy-to-access, easy-to-understand bridge between quality second language acquisition research and teacher practice in the world language classroom. For more information, visit musicuentos.com/blackbox.